right. Thank you, guys. As Vas said, I'm Josh Bourdon. I'm the Apple Desktop and Mobile Administrator at the Ottawa Area ISD. It's kind of cool. I actually went to college in the Twin Cities. I'm from Michigan, but it's cool to be back here. Before I was at the ISD, I worked over at a place called First Tech, may she rest in peace, over on Hennepin. It's kind of where I got first started doing some Jamf stuff, so it's very cool to be up here at a community session. So let's get into it. Configurator 2 versus JSS API, Dawn of Justice. What we're going to go over today. An intermediate school district is kind of different, so I'm going to share you a little bit of a background on what that means. We're also going to go over the needs of shared, in air quotes, and shared iPads. Obviously, shared is a term that we might have used generically for iPads without a user, but now Apple has given us a proper noun of shared for these multi-user sign-in, sign-out iPads in education. And we are going to talk about that by telling a tale of mortals stuck caught in a battle between iOS superheroes. And we're going to do that by looking at the past, present, and future for these shared devices. So real quick, Ottawa Area ISD. What is an ISD, an intermediate school district? We're basically a county-level public school district that we exist for kind of resource sharing and doing things at a larger scale that might be harder to do for a smaller local district. Things like career training, teacher training, early childhood stuff, special education. Some of our big flagship programs include our Career Line Tech Center. We provide career training and experience to high school students all across Ottawa County and actually a bit beyond that as well. Programs like culinary programs, medical careers, automotive, big diesel engines, graphic design, just pretty much everything under the sun. Another one of our big programs and buildings is our Ottawa Area Center, which is a very large special education building for students with maybe more severe special needs that might not be able to be facilitated quite as well at their local district. As a part of that program, we also have a ton of sites that are CBIs, community-based instruction, where those students can make the transition from school life to independent adult life and get a little bit of career experience and life training help. And we also do a ton of early childhood and adult education programs as well. But more than that, my main bread and butter is a relatively new thing for our ISD. About 5 years ago, we started a thing called the Ottawa Area Information Technology Consortium. We have been providing, just as a public school district, a public-to-public entity thing, just networking services, a big wide area network, kind of acting sort of like an ISP to our local school districts. So we have that relationship. About 5 years ago, we started a consortium of these 5 other school districts that, due to some budgetary needs and whatnot, needed to consolidate tech resources under one banner. So we are the seat of this consortium. We provide all of the networking, help desk, field services, the main tech director team. It's all under one house for these school districts. So we've got a lot to work with. It's a lot like being a managed service provider, but in a public-to-public sense. We have an administrative board that's made up of local school district administrators. So you get all the fun transparency of the public world along with some of that other baggage with it. Quick breakdown of our devices. These are last year's numbers, so a little subject to change. But we have right around 2,000 managed Macs, a little over 5,000 managed iPads. So our Apple devices well exceed our Windows environment and are rivaling our Chrome world there. And I am the one Apple administrator, the one air traffic controller that keeps all the trains and planes running on time. So back to the bread and butter of this, Configurator 2 versus JSS API, Dawn of Justice. So little background. I said I went to college here in the Twin Cities. I actually studied, of all things, music composition and, I kid you not, songwriting. It's amazing that I'm employed, right? Thank you. One of the things that we learned is that if you're being creative, you're writing a thing, it's a good thing to have a statement of intent and write to a title. How many people just showed up because it was a wacky, crazy title? Anybody? No, you're just that into configurator automation. Great. Well, anyway, the other thing we learned about writing, is you should write a lot of stuff because only 25% of it will be good. So hopefully, unlike our friends at Warner Brothers, we will not disappoint here. So. All right, so we're going to talk about these shared iPads. It's iPads that, in your JSS or your Jamf Pro server are not assigned to a user. The needs of those are a bit different. So, if you're doing a one-to-one program and you're in this new DEP world, it's pretty simple, right? All you need to set up a device, all you need is login. Login's all you need, which is a lesser-known Lennon-McCartney song. They were very much ahead of their time. User signs in. That is the input. That all goes back to LDAP, depending on what groups they're in. That's how the devices get configured. That's how apps get out to them, just based on those groups there, or any other data that you might add to the user on your JSS. But for our shared devices, it's a kind of a different world. We don't have that information, and oftentimes, a technician or maybe a teacher or some sort of setup user needs to emulate in the DEP world that user setup. You have to take a stack of devices in a physical world, you put them in front of you, and you need to set them up somehow. You label them, you do all those things. But there's this whole digital world beyond that on our MDM, on our JSS, that gets all the provisioning and all of the dozens of apps that everybody wants. Everybody wants apps. They all want different apps. Every teacher in every classroom. So we've got this digital world that we've got to communicate with. And some of our setup users acting like that might not understand that digital world. When I was a kid, I did not understand that digital world. When I was a little kid, I was about 5 years old. We had an old Apple IIe that I'm not sure what the statute of limitations are, but my dad may or may not have pulled from the trash of the school district that he worked at. And we took that. No one has ever pulled anything from the trash. Took that home, and I found a blank floppy disk, and I went to my dad and I said, "Hey, Dad, I got this blank disk. It's got a label on it. Can you write on the label, Care Bears?" 5-year-old me. And my dad's like, "Son, why do you want me to write Care Bears on this floppy disk?" I said, "Well, from what I understand about writing as a 5-year-old, we have disks that say Print Shop, and I put it in and it loads up Print Shop. And we have a disk that says Wings of Fury, which is a fantastic game. And when you put it in, it plays Wings of Fury. Therefore, if you write Care Bears on this floppy drive, which, by the way, is very popular at daycare, it will be a Care Bears game." Unbeknownst to me, this digital world on the disk, that is not how games get coded, right? You can't just write a label on a disk, put it in the computer, and that's the game. Very much the same with the iPads. We can't put a label on the iPad on the physical world and expect our JSS, our MDM, to understand that label. So it's a totally different environment. So let's go back in time. Let's take a look at how we bridge that gap between the physical world and our digital world. Maybe there was a cool shiver and hush as we see Configurator 1. Configurator 1, I know it scares some people, but it was actually a pretty great tool for these shared devices. We could do a lot of things with them. Biggest thing, we could take a whole bunch of devices, plug them in, and we could name them sequentially. 30 iPads, all labeled 1 through 30. Very, very nice. We could supervise our devices, take that stack. That was the input. These 30 devices, go ahead, supervise them. Could do your iOS updates without saturating APs and doing all that stuff. And you could add a Wi-Fi profile before you got devices set up to your MDM. Didn't have to tap in a bunch of keys or make open networks. It was very easy to get a whole bunch of devices set up at once. The best part, you could do custom wallpapers, and it would make a wallpaper for each device with its name right on the device. So even somebody like a teacher knows exactly, with not a whole lot of technical know-how, yes, this is device 31, and that matches up with our management system. And of course, we could do apps without an Apple ID. Big thing when you don't have users. You don't want to leave an Apple ID out there on a device because it's just not meant for a no-user scenario. So Obviously, we have to talk about the downsides of Configurator. You were literally tied down to a single device. Had to be a specific Mac. If you had Mac A and iPads A, you could not use that with Mac B and cross groups of iPads because the supervision certificates that existed on those couldn't be shared around. It was very difficult to work with in that sense, and that kind of gave it a mind of its own. If you had an iPad that had a different supervision certificate, your other instances of Configurator would just kind of nuke and pave those devices and undo a lot of work that you were trying to do. But great, exciting announcement. We got the VPP Managed Distribution and Device Enrollment Program. These were the tools that made MDM, our JSS, our superhero with godlike powers from on high. It could supervise devices over the air. It could prevent management profiles from being removed and leap buildings in a single bound, things like that. We could send apps to Apple IDs that we associated through a bit of a lengthy process for shared devices and revoke apps back. But all these great features brought some problems for these shared devices. For example, for one of our districts, if you had a one-to-one program and a shared program, and you had one token, you had a lot of problems when you went to managed distribution. And if you started using DEP devices with Configurator, it was very angry with you and would start erasing those devices. And you couldn't send apps without an Apple ID to those devices anymore because of the way that DEP had its own supervision certificate. So what would happen is you might be very excited to get rid of Configurator in your one-to-one, but that meant you inadvertently torched everything in your shared devices. So the managed distribution worked fairly well for our one-to-one, and it hit the shared devices like a ton of bricks. So I don't know if this is where you guys were 3 years ago, but this was definitely us. We went through a whole lot of processes just to get these shared devices set up the way that we wanted to. This is a post. I apologize, it's not Jamf Nation. It was before we were Jamf customers. One of my friends and coworkers in the iPad Brain Trust just reaching out to the community somewhere saying, hey, we are doing crazy stuff. Here was our process. We would enroll the iPads in our MDM. We would log into iTunes with an Apple ID that we created from a random script from, I think the guy's name was Brandon Usher. It would automate iTunes to make a unique Apple ID for each device. We had a crazy sheet of barcodes that we would have the Apple IDs and passwords on. We'd plug barcode scanners in the iPads to try and make that sign-in process with the Apple IDs faster, just to make all the licensing work out, do that whole VPP enrollment process. And at the end of the day, we were just saying there has got to be a quicker and easier way. So in kind of our circle, we get to the famous Danny 33C prediction. If you're out there, Danny, he empathized with us. He told us all the crazy, wacky things that he was doing, and he said, it's my belief that Apple will start letting MDMs have more control, and Apple Configurator will go away within the next 2 years. So let's see if that held true here. This was, by the way, March 17th, 2014. Not the best reaction that we had on our team for 2 years. But about a year later, Apple sent out an email to education customers. And for as much as we always beg for a roadmap, this was pretty much a roadmap for education customers on what they were doing. They were going to have app distribution without an Apple ID. We were going to have more classroom management, things like that. We're still waiting on some things, but I assume probably more to do with publishers than anything else. So what else? Later that fall, September 2015, Jamf releases with the JSS version 9.81, those features that Apple talked about. And we get one of the greatest features that I think is the biggest game changer for iOS devices. You can now distribute apps directly to mobile devices without an Apple ID. Come on, guys, more excitement. This is like the greatest thing that ever happened. Woohoo! I forgot, we got to keep it with the superhero theme, so, let's lens flare it. Woohoo! All flash and no substance. So what else did we get? Around the same time when Apple released El Capitan, we got an old friend back. We got Configurator version 2. And Configurator 2 gave us a lot of great features for these shared devices. For one thing, it was aware of DEP. You could take a supervision certificate from one Mac, send it to another, and you could work with all of the devices that had been set up with that supervision certificate. You could take it even one step further, and you could take that supervision certificate to your JSS, and now DEP can supervise all of those devices with that certificate, and now all your configurator machines can talk to your DEP devices. Is anybody doing this at all? It's the greatest thing. I highly recommend it, and it will be very necessary for some things we talk about in a bit. It could set up those DEP devices. It knew about DEP. It could tell the devices, hey, everybody plugged in over USB. Go to your MDM server. Go do your setup. You could add a Wi-Fi profile so you're not tapping in all of those keys. We got sequential naming back. We could add some fun tokens to make device names a bit easier. And we also got our custom wallpapers back. We also get a nice QR code function too. So if we want to do some digital asset tagging, we can do that as well. But for us, despite all these great features, one question still remained with 5,000 devices. How do we scope all of these apps? How do we get all of the grouping correct? What is going to be the best way to do this? So, thinking it through, how about device name smart groups, right? Just pick a smart group. All right, it's going to be this base name, and that's a criteria. But for us, we kind of have this old Active Directory-centric naming scheme for devices, even though iPads don't need Active Directory. But it can be very complicated, and we have tons of buildings, tons of devices, tons of districts. They all get an abbreviation. Causes some problems, right? If somebody names something after the elementary school East, but forget that that's abbreviated to EST, it does not fit that smart group. We sometimes have conflicting abbreviations where people forget, oh, yeah, Hamilton Blue Star Elementary is HBL, not HBS. And so if we use these smart groups, the problem is that anybody that needs to make changes, again, I'm the one administrator, we've got to go into those smart groups and make changes. If I want to delegate that down to somebody else, there's a lot of potential for people to make a mistake. Has anybody ever just deleted criteria from a smart group and saved it? Anybody familiar with set theory? You'll know what happens, right? You define your universe, that's your smart group, you add your criteria, that filters it down. If you take all that criteria away, you're sending it to everything in the known universe on the JSS. So suddenly, every iPad on your JSS is getting whatever was scoped to that smart group. That's what I get for only letting a few people delete groups and think that they can get rid of stuff by getting rid of criteria. So naming wasn't going to be a good way for us to go. OK, so maybe we could use Configurator 2 blueprints. We could just make it a configuration in there for each and every cart. But obviously, there would be more than I could even show on the screen. So with our consortium, that is the major problem. We have these 6 school districts. They all kind of have their own identity within the consortium. They exist. Each district is its own little box. And inside of those boxes is a bunch of different boxes of buildings and departments. And then inside of those boxes are carts of iPads and groups of iPads, and eventually it just keeps going down and down forever, and you spend a lot of time at the bar and you lose your hair. So let's zoom back out. And so I was looking at all of these groups of iPads, and I was saying, OK, there's got to be a better way for us to think about how we distribute apps. So I was looking around and said there's got to be some commonality, things that we use in every district that's kind of naming conventions that can be the same. I said, well, we distribute a whole bunch of apps to first grade iPads, and we distribute a whole bunch of apps to second grade iPads, music iPads, STEM iPads, and a whole bunch of apps that are kind of in a bunch of different groups all together. So if we could just have a system where in Configurator or whatever, people could get a list of app distribution groups, and they could just make a selection on those, get that off to the JSS, we'd we'd be good. That sounds like a perfect job for an extension attribute. An extension attribute, obviously, is just a custom field on our JSS that we can write some data to with a script or user input, format up somebody's selection with a bit of XML, and send it off. Pretty simple, right? So if we just take that criteria, it would show up on our JSS like that. If that criteria matches what's in a smart group, whatever is scoped to that smart group would show up on the iPad. So if we've got Google Drive apps written in that extension attribute, it'd get in that Google Drive apps group, get those apps. If it's got iLife written in there as well, it would get into the iLife app group, and we'd be set. But we still have that same problem. How do we get that data to the device record on the JSS? We're dealing with people that might be techs with a lot of knowledge, or teachers or parapros with not a whole lot of knowledge. Obviously, it's going to be some sort of script, but what are we going to do for the input? I can't just write iPads on my desk, and while magic is true, go set up iPads. By the way, if you're saying you didn't define magic, that's not how magic works. So, again, back to that original sort of Care Bears conundrum, right? We have this physical world, and we have this digital world that a lot of our setup users might not know about. It might be easy for them out of the box to physically set up the devices and label them, but we've got to get this data to our JSS. And so I was thinking about what other systems do we have that we can use as an analog or a go-by, kind of emulate. And we've been using Deploy Studio for a long time. We've used it before we were Jamf customers. Easy to just drop an enrollment package in there, and hey, suddenly now you're doing a Jamf workflow. Pretty simple workflow, right? Your person signs in, they select the workflow they want, maybe they rename a device, and it takes care of everything else. And the biggest thing about a workflow like that is that the physical device is the input. That connection is basically the input to some sort of script. So looking at the problem of how do we do this, we identified, obviously, great, we've solved these pitfalls of getting Wi-Fi on the device before it's set up so we don't have to tap stuff. We can now, with Configurator 2, do our bulk enrollment in DEP and sequentially rename devices, but we're still missing this ability to take these devices in the real world very easily for people of all technical aptitudes, talk to the JSS, work with those devices in hand, and guide people through the setup. So at this point, it's about 2 years after the infamous Danny 33C prediction. And I'm kind of going, all right, I guess we're a bit off here. We're missing the mark. But it turns out I missed something. At WWDC 2015, Sal Sahuian, and it's a crazy complicated last name to read, so I hope I said that right, who is the former chief of automation for Apple, gave a presentation on supporting enterprise with OS X automation. And about the last third, he covered this hidden feature in Configurator that I don't think a whole lot of people know about. So we've got the JSS and we've got our Configurator. They can do some basic talking to each other out of the box by setting up DEP devices. But there's this little hidden command line tool called Configutil. Does anybody know about Configutil? Hey, awesome, all right. There are a few people that know about it. So this is a great session. You should check it out. You don't need a developer account, last I checked. Sal can explain it 10 times better than I can. He goes through a very basic guided setup Apple script for an end user of just about any technical aptitude to set up devices. It's very easy to install the Configurator automation tools. You just need Configurator downloaded. You go to the menu, you hit install. You get that command line utility. It's actually inside of the sandboxed App Store package, but you can put that into Composer, put it at the path that's here, and you can send it out to any of your Configurator devices or your field techs or however you want to go about it. Really easy to get it out there in the field. You also get some automator tools if that's more your style. So I looked at this stuff and I said, okay, Configurator can take devices that are plugged into it. It can read those serial numbers with a script, a bash script, an Apple script. I think even some sort of Java Object-C that's over my head is another option. We can get serial numbers as an output. We have this great JSS API that we can use serial numbers as an input. So we've got a connection now between the physical and digital world that users don't need to be aware of when they're setting up devices en masse. So I said, all right, we had this thing where we were looking for a quicker, easier way. Maybe I couldn't make the quickest, easiest way, but I could definitely make a quicker and easier one. So how hard could it be? So about 2 years after the fateful prediction, I put a little project called Casa-figurator out into the world. It definitely needs a better name, so if you want to make a suggestion, I'm open to it. We got Jamf now, Jamf Pro, maybe Jamf please. So you can grab that on GitHub. We did most of the testing with Sierra. It's working on High Sierra, working with the last version of the JSS 10 beta. You're going to want to grab Configurator 2, obviously, with the Configurator automation tools, and helps to have your supervision certificate on your JSS synced up with your configurator devices, and obviously grab a big, gigantic USB hub and set up devices to your heart's content. So I have a public version on that GitHub, and I'm going to demo that setup that a setup user would go through. Now I got to watch the video over here because it's live. So, all right. So basically, we've already activated some devices just with the simple prepare function in DEP. So we've got some devices activated with Configurator 2, and they just enrolled themselves into the JSS. Out-of-the-box functions for Configurator. But when we go over to the JSS, we notice that the devices are all named iPad, not super helpful. If we go to the Management tab, we see they're not really in any important groups. They have no apps scoped to them. So I'm going to open up the Casa-figurator script, get a nice little welcome page, and the user will be prompted to sign into your JSS. Very simple, just pop in their JSS credentials. Get a little feedback. It's kind of in a proof of concept stage here. So it's going to check for some extension attributes and then ask, hey, just give me a base name for these iPads. I'll name them that and then a number. Pretty simple. It'll even do some smart numbering, so they'll sort correctly in your JSS. And then it'll say, hey, maybe you got a small hub. You want to start at number 5 and go 5, 6, 7 down the line. You can start at any number you want. And then it's going to look on your JSS for smart group criteria, and it's going to say, hey, what app distribution groups do you want these iPads to be in? So our user will make a selection here. We're going to grab the Google Drive apps and the second-grade apps. We'll hit OK. Get a little confirmation on what we want. And OK, now we're speeding up for the sake of time here. And it's just going to loop through all of the devices that the Configurator command line automation tools found and build up a string of XML and do a little put request to the JSS and update information for those devices. And once that's updated, those devices will get into the correct smart groups. So we're just looking at the JSS at this point for the sake of monitoring. If you want to do some wallpaper stuff, you can do that too. But nobody actually needs to log into the JSS for this to work. So if we just kind of check our devices again, they all got renamed. And if we click on a device, we'll scroll down to our extension attribute for app distribution groups. We see that the fields have been updated with our selections. And if we go over to the Management tab, we can check out our app scope. And we see that we've got a bunch of Google Drive apps and some first-grade apps or second grade, whichever it was, have now been scoped to them. So really easy way with just some of these scripting tools to make a setup utility for our users. So I'm going to talk about some in-house things that we do for the version that we use at the Ottawa Area ISD. So back to that wacky, crazy naming convention abbreviation. I want people to use the right naming scheme. So in-house, what we do is we have a prompt that says, hey, what's your district? And that selection of district determines the buildings that they're in. And it will find little abbreviations and start building the device name. So our naming scheme is enforced. No mismatch of East and EST. And also, based on their districts, it's a different level or different groups of app distribution groups. Just kind of some simple greps in our our script there. So if you were to get this set up on your JSS or Jamf Pro server, you just need to have an extension attribute called app distribution group, exactly how it's shown there. And then you need to make some smart device groups. Just put in a little no space string, Google Drive apps, iLife apps, first grade apps, so on, so forth. And then just scope your apps on the JSS, which can be done with the API if you want to do it really fast. But that's a whole other presentation or blog post. So keep an eye on the GitHub there. So if you don't want to have to worry about doing it all perfectly, there's also a setup script that will run here. Comes in the release package that you get from the GitHub. Pop in your JSS URL. And when you do that, that's actually going to write a preference so that when you run the iPad setup script, it's going to remember that. And you could also send that out with a configuration profile to your users that might use this. So it's going to look and see if it found the extension attribute. If it didn't, it's going to say, hey, I want to write the extension attribute app distribution group. Are you sure you want me to write something to your JSS from this crazy person on the internet? So we'll go ahead and do that. Me from the past is a little slow. OK. And if it doesn't find any app distribution groups, go ahead and add them. Oh, we do check on the JSS. It does. The magic works. It's there. So now we're going to add some app distribution groups. It's just going to guide you through that. The app distribution groups need to start with app distribution group in their name. So using the script just helps to make sure that you've set up everything correctly. So we'll put in some criteria, Google Drive apps. And we'll continue on. We'll do our music apps. And then some first grade apps. And second grade apps. So just an easy way to write that stuff to the JSS. Obviously, once you get the first one set up, you can just clone, just change the back half of the name. And all the JSS is doing is just kind of serving that up out of the smart groups. And that's what the script reads. It just reads that criteria. So once we go over here, we see that we've got the smart group set up, and you can go ahead and scope your apps. So that's available for you guys to play with and start kind of looking at some fun that you can do with Configurator automation. I think it's one of the most important things that came around with Configurator 2 and in this new crazy DEP world. Makes things a lot easier. Some future plans. Oh, not future plans, sorry. Right, so back to the whole superhero thing. Configurator 2 and the JSS, who seemed for the longest time hell-bent on destroying each other's work, now finally learned to talk to each other with the help of command line automation tools and have joined the same team or league where justice may dawn. So now future plans. We've got, this year, we had a version that is all-in-one. You don't need to activate the devices using the configurator prepare action. It's all automated into the script. So it's just one button for people to double-click on to get started. It's a little complicated to try and make a public version. You've got some certificates and private keys that you've got to get into the app bundle. So working on that to make that available for people. We had some fun this year. One of our districts started using eSpark. And for eSpark, all the devices need to be assigned to a user so they can do tracking of that student data. So what better way to tell a teacher, hey, Jimmy needs to use Jimmy's device, Susie needs to use Susie's device by putting their pictures on there. So with Configurator automation, we were able to make customized wallpapers beyond what's out of the box in Configurator and pop some photos on there. One downside is we didn't realize how much rosters would change by the first day of school. So we're hopefully going to be doing that over the JSS next year. Once you get it set up over the wire, it's actually pretty easy to do over the JSS. The JSS does save all those wallpapers, so there is a feature request to make it a little more friendly to do custom wallpapers over that. And that is it. So again, those resources, my GitHub's up there. If you want to play around with Casa-figurator, check out configautomation.com. That is Sal Seguyen's team, or former team, at Apple. They've got all the documentation on how to use those automation tools and some extra utilities that don't come out of the box from the install in the Configurator app. That developer video is up there as well. It's open to the public. Last third of the video, they walk you right through how it all works. So that is that. Thank you very much.